Hello. In this video I want to look at a recent article by Olivia Sibony, Dan Lovallo and Thomas Powell called Behavioural Strategy and the Strategic Decision Architecture of the Firm. It appeared in the May issue of the California Management Review in 2017. This was a special issue focusing on the impact of behavioural strategy on management practice. The article is interesting as it seeks to highlight the cognitive biases that can impact different decisions and how process design can counteract or neutralise those biases. It also provides guidance on how levers in the firm can be used to adjust strategic decision-making processes to match the type of decision being faced. The article starts with an introduction of the field of behavioural strategy. This emerging area of study seeks to bring insights regarding human cognition, emotions and behaviour to enrich thinking about strategy and its real-world practice. The field has already had an impact on public policy, with nudge units seeking to change outcomes in areas such as tax compliance and energy conservation. This article is an attempt to shift away from an individual perspective on behavioural strategy, a reductionist view if you like, to develop a firm level view, specifically how strategic decision processes that make up the firm can be powerful levers to direct strategy. Strategic decision processes take many forms, including long-range strategic planning, executive problem solving, bargaining within the top team, board politics, and many other routines in the firm. The authors adopt Mintzberg's view that processes qualify as strategic when they are important in terms of the actions taken, the resources committed, and the precedents set. Not about just one person or activity, but the full range of actions and processes that shape decisions about the overall direction of the enterprise. Strategic decision processes have a significant impact on individual and group biases. Some will neutralise those biases. For example, capital expenditure approval processes can dampen familiarity biases and favouritism, but some amplify those biases. For example, resource allocation processes can reinforce the status quo, or adding more layers to an approval process may take risk aversion to a level not intended. While individuals may have limited conscious power over their own biases, they can design strategic processes to counter such biases before they become institutionalized. Decision processes tend to group into patterns, and this means that we can categorize them into types. Sibony and his fellow authors introduce a categorization scheme made up of 3 strategic process types: investment processes, resource allocation processes, and blue sky processes. They then step through describing each of these in turn. Investment processes involve go or no-go decisions that result in significant commitments or strategic bets. For example, shall we launch this product, hire this senior executive, enter this market, build that plant, or acquire that company? If not a straight yes-no decision, it means choosing between well-defined options. While they're not always referred to as investments, they do all involve the forecasting of costs and benefits and the evaluation of risks. The essential outcome variable here is achieving the desired level of risk exposure for the business. Here, processes need to deal with individual biases in forecasting and risk estimation that can lead to excess risk aversion or alternatively risk taking. When individuals are taking new, large, one-off investment decisions, they tend to be overconfident about their own and their firm's capability to deliver and often underplay competitors' ability to respond. And so the firm ends up taking more risk than was intended. In contrast, managers often become attached to existing strategies and resource types and avoid taking risk. Often the pooling effect on risk across the firm's portfolio of investments is ignored, thus amplifying risk aversion. Moving to the second process type, the authors describe resource allocation processes as involving questions about how much in the distribution of scarce resources. So how are resources allocated across a firm's operating units or other functions and geographies? For example, the annual budgeting process or capital allocation process. The key issue here is the level of strategic agility desired in being able to change allocations. As such, processes need to counteract individual biases towards inertia. Often managers will stick with the status quo, using previous decisions as a guide, rather than respond to external events. For example, a disruptive market entry. Being loss averse, executives will fight harder to defend existing allocations and approaches rather than switch to a new approach. In the final type, blue sky processes involve open-ended questions about what is possible and what direction the organisation should adopt. Usually these decisions involve high uncertainty, ambiguity and a lack of clearly defined options. For example, how do we respond to an emerging technology? Or how should we compete? The key issue in blue sky processes is the level of innovation. So producing the desired degree of novelty and creativity and counteracting individual biases towards narrowing options and sticking with the familiar that has delivered past success. Managers have a tendency to look for well-trodden paths internally or those taken by successful companies, halo effect, and to stop generating ideas when one or two plausible solutions have emerged, satisficing. Idea generation stops and the process reduces to an investment process. The result is often too little innovation and the absence of truly innovative insights and plans. Having described three broad strategic decision types, Sibony, Lovallo and Powell consider how firms can put in place a strategic decision architecture to address the individual and group biases they identified. In this, they stress that the intention is not to always strive to reduce risk, to become more agile, or to become more innovative. But the level of these should be a conscious choice rather than the result of unconscious biases. In doing this, managers have a range of levers to deploy. The authors highlight 7: degree of formality, the number of decision layers, information rules, breadth of participation and empowerment, financial and non-financial incentives, rules of strategic debate, for example, the expected level of conflict and argument, and closure rules, how the decision is finally made. In the article, they then discuss how these levers can be used to calibrate the 3 decision types they described. Firstly, for investment processes and calibrating the chosen level of risks, Sibony and his fellow authors indicate that formality layering and closure are the most powerful levers to nudge the process, although others do have an effect. More formalisation, more decision layers, and more stringent closure rules act as a brake on excessive optimism and unintended risk-taking, while relaxing these will curb excess risk aversion. However, care is needed in the approach taken. The authors give the example of a firm that felt it was carrying too much risk, despite a closure rule at the investment committee that required only 2 members to object for the proposal to be rejected. The firm initially reduced this number to 1. However, this proved to be less stringent than the previous rule. Members were avoiding confrontation and not using their veto. Changing the rule to 4 objections needed for a veto had the desired effect. By encouraging people to form coalitions, it prompted more lively debate and so more challenge. Although agility is widely praised, it is also costly and destabilising. The right balance needs to be found between continuity and change. In calibrating agility in resource allocation processes, the most powerful levers are breadth of participation, information rules, and incentives. The danger here is that budgeting, planning, capital allocation, and other such periodic processes become routine and automatic. Managers unconsciously adhere to the status quo and lose sight of the strategic choices being made by default in allocation. To address this, firms can vary the pattern of participation to shift viewpoints. Also introduce new information requirements, perhaps new approaches, measurements, and reporting requirements. For example, zero-based budgeting. Incentive schemes can also be designed to nudge behaviour. For example, tying bonuses to firm outcomes rather than divisions or departments. Finally, innovation is often portrayed as an unambiguous good and non-innovation almost as evil. But innovation has costs, and strategists need to balance the need between developing the new while exploiting what the firm already has. So balancing exploration and exploitation to be successful. The authors identify debate, participation, and incentives as the key levers in calibrating the level of innovation in blue sky processes. Here, the need is to address tendencies to repeat old strategies, quickly fall back to consider only familiar options, and focus only on inside views, rather than looking at changes in the external environment. Existing patterns of thinking can be disrupted by designing strategic debates, such that people are encouraged to advocate innovations or scenarios irrespective of their current worldview. Usually this requires a broadening of the participation in such debates, often from outside the organisation. Here, the tolerance for dissent and argument must increase. For example, Google does this by insisting on Discord plus deadline. Amazon expects their people to have backbone, disagree, and commit. And in McKinsey, every consultant must uphold the obligation of dissent. Sibony, Lovallo, and Powell conclude the article by stressing how individual and group cognitive biases can distort decision making, and at an individual level that these biases are difficult to control for. They recommend instead strategists focus on the organisational level and seek to neutralise such biases by the design of decision processes and the decision architecture. This is not simple, and care is needed as unintended consequences are frequent. The three types of decision process the authors define do overlap, and so judgment is needed on a case-by-case basis as to the right levers for intervention. Of course, in this there is also a danger of bias in the categorization, so we may still end up with too much risk aversion, costly agility, or heedless innovation. Here, consideration is needed of the firm's measurement system so the impact of intervention is observable. So, what do we make of Sibony, Lovallo and Powell's article? Well, it usefully drills down below a generic view of strategy process and makes the impact of the cognitive biases of individuals and groups clear. The article is also a good reminder that the questions of risk, agility and innovation are more nuanced than popular commentary would have us believe. All are dilemmas where too little or too much are equally bad. The right balance of each are fundamental strategic choices for every firm, although unfortunately are often made subconsciously. In my view, senior managers should explicitly consider these choices and map how different strategic processes impact these choices, recognizing, as Sibony and his fellow authors do, that processes may be a hybrid of the three types described. So overall, an article well worth thinking about. Thank you for watching.